What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a Thursday edition of On Q. I'm your host, as always, Rich Quinones. Don't forget, check us out on social media at Rich Q on Q, the YouTube channel growing exponentially. Appreciate everything. New edition of BYP is out as well. And of course, some segments from Martinez and company that you hear on the Tony Bruno Sports Network. But got to talk a little Eagles and Ravens. Been a while, but always good to catch up with our guy. Glenn Irby does a great job covering both squads, respectively, managing editor at the Eagles Wire and the Ravens Wire at the Cover 2 NFL. And good to talk to you, brother. Happy holidays to you.
Same, Rich. How you doing, man?
Hey, man, I'm doing well. I'm wondering if we are doing as good as, say, the Baltimore Ravens. We'll get to the Eagles. I want to do the Eagles last because the Ravens, man, I'll tell you, that was a woodshed type of a moment for the Ravens. You know, forget about the line and from the gambling aspect. I think a lot of people thought, including myself, the 49ers were going to be more physical. I didn't expect the turnovers from Purdy. And then they pulled him eventually, whether he was banged up or not. But I was thoroughly impressed by not only what the Ravens were able to do defensively against San Francisco the other night, but also offensively. And now you look at Lamar Jackson, you have to say, because it's a week to week, the NFL is right, MVP of the league right now. But talk to me a little bit about what Baltimore was able to do against San Francisco, and what side of the ball were you most impressed with?
I think the defensive side of the ball, I think as a whole, I think even from the quarterback down, it's a physically imposing group. So when you're talking about quarterback, Lamar Jackson can do things running the ball. Gus Edwards runs with physicality. Justice Hill runs with physicality. You know, Isaiah Likely, Zay Flowers, those guys. But I think from a defensive standpoint, I don't think the 49ers were that prepared and truly understood how athletic those guys are, how stout they are, how dynamic they are. When you're talking about Kyle Hamilton, Clowney, Marlon Humphrey going from the outside into the slot on key positions. You know, they go two or three deep at every position. They're physically stout, they're physically imposing, and they're not for that whole track meet on grass type of thing. They're not going to play that type of way, and they're not going to let you play that type of way.
I thought this was a game where, I mean, obviously both those teams respectively, Ravens walk out with the 33-19 win. The game was not really relatively close when you think about
Right.
it. The game within the game. I mean, they led this one. I mean, early on, it looked like it was a baseball score 5-3, but then obviously Baltimore pulls away in the third quarter with the 17 points for the win, the 14-point win. Baltimore right now sitting at 12-3, San Fran sitting 11-4. I thought this was going to be a game where, game of the year, here we go, smash mouth football. You have three perennial MVP candidates, CMC, Brock Purdy, and then Lamar Jackson. You're a lot closer to the Ravens and the Eagles as well. But I want to get your thought on Lamar Jackson's season as a whole, because we know the league is so week to week. A couple weeks ago was Dak, then it was Brock, then it was McCaffrey, and now all of a sudden it's Lamar Jackson. It just seems as though as he goes offensively, this team goes offensively. Are we undervaluing his talent? Is he an underappreciated quarterback? Or maybe we don't focus too much of our attention on Lamar Jackson because he quietly has put together a ridiculous season.
I think it's a little bit of everything. I mean, I think he's been efficient. I think he's made splash plays. He's made plays from the pocket. Then you take into the account that, he leads his team in rushing.
Yep.
So you could have a situation where he throws for over 3,500 yards and rushes for over 1,000, depending on what happens over these last two games. So I think it's from the standpoint that it's ugly. You see some of the sidearm throws. It's not as pretty. It's probably not even as pretty a game as, say, Jalen Hurts has. But in terms of his ability to make plays from the pocket, his ability to now run the ball while looking to throw first before it takes off. I think
Yeah.
his game is fully rounded, into form. Todd Monken gets a ton of credit for that, but I mean, he's had an unbelievable season, and I think thus far he's had a season better or on par with that 2019 MVP season.
And in 2019, he went off. I mean, he's only 26 years old. It's crazy when you think about that. I feel as though they're also giving him a lot more leadway offensively. Like if he's going to improvise, he's going to improvise. There's some quarterbacks that you want to kind of flush them out of the pocket. We saw a couple times even last year where, and I go back to the one loss he's had against the NFC in his career against the Giants. Late in that game, flushed him out of the pocket, high snap, bobbled, grabbed it, threw across his body. Things you don't want to do. We're not seeing those
Right.
types of mistakes this year. Man, I'll tell you, the way the AFC is, and I know we're going to sit there and say Kansas City's going to figure it out. I'm not necessarily sure that's the case. Buffalo, Allen, you can throw him into the mix as well. He's had a really good year. He's carrying the Buffalo Bills. Miami, I don't think is physical enough to beat up or compete with a team like Baltimore. Other teams are flawed. Other teams have their issues. I'm trying to think of a team that you feel right now coming out of the AFC would match well with the Ravens, or is it pretty much the Ravens conference to lose? I mean, do you look at them as a clear, legit Super Bowl contending team?
It's their conference to lose. I do look at them as a clear, legit Super Bowl contending team, but then I also look at the Cleveland Browns as a team that are built to withstand this physicality, to withstand the juggernaut, the spurt on points. And if you get Joe Flacco able to, hit on the deep ball, able to be efficient, then at that point, a Cleveland matchup in the postseason gives me some pause and it does scare me. But I think, any matchup in the AFC scares me. But in terms of the Browns, knowing Baltimore's personnel, knowing how they want to do things, and Jim Schwartz being able to scheme up pressure off the edge while keeping Lamar in the pocket, that's a game and that's a matchup that I'm looking at, and that gives me some pause and that I can see down the future.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I mean, you go back and I believe they had Watson under center when they lost, when
Correct.
Cleveland beat them 33-31. And then I'm trying to pull up what was and then they lost earlier in the season. Yeah, when they didn't have Watson as well. They got actually
Correct.
roasted in that game. I think the Flacco story is incredible. I think it's great. The guy comes off the sofa. We always knew he had a cannon for an arm.
Right.
Doesn't really have the mobility, but listen, Cleveland doesn't care. They want him to throw the football down the field. And think about this: what Cleveland's been able to do. Fourth quarterback, you lose your star running back early on in the season, so that head coach has done a hell of a job. I also think these two teams, because they're both in the AFC North, there's that, just a familiarity. Man, I'll tell you though, if Cleveland gets bounced early, I just don't see a Miami. I don't see Kansas City. First of all, Patrick Mahomes is going to have to go on the road for a playoff game, which is the first time in his career. Like, I just don't see Kansas City. I think Baltimore is such a physically imposing team. That's why I'm surprised they were able to actually punch the 49ers in the mouth like they did, because for my money, I thought the 49ers were the most physical team in the NFL. And Baltimore and look, you chalk it up to a bad night for the quarterback, couple bad picks, I get it. But that's kind of where I'm at with the Ravens. I think this is, man, I just think this could potentially be their year. They're just
They
very balanced. And I also believe it's a little more free reign with Lamar Jackson. I think he kind of needs that, right? Because in the past, it was always, let me take off first as opposed to sit in the pocket.
I think they just, whether it be both sides of the ball, they come at you in waves. So I think when you start talking about, you can get a ton of Lamar on offense, then you can get a ton of the passing game on offense,
Yeah.
and then when you're tired of chasing those guys around, you can get a ton of Justice Hill, you can get a ton of Gus Edwards. So they're not big name running backs, but they run hard, they play hard. Same on defense. Up front, they come at you in waves. Clowney is so physically imposing in terms of just disrupting everything with the way he plays off the edge. Van Noy's been stout. Odafe always been stout. So they're stout up front. Linebackers Queen and Roquan are two of the best at the positions, and they play right there in the middle. They go three deep at safety, three or four deep at cornerback. So from the standpoint of you taking advantage of your matchups, whether it be a tight end Kittle or wide receiver Deebo Samuel or running back McCaffrey, they're going to match you at those key positions.
Yeah, and it's interesting, just kind of piggyback on your point. The 49ers, I think what makes their offense so unique is the fact that they're skill position players, right? Their skill set, but they move a lot of guys in motion. That's what they do best. And I think that's what disrupted the Philadelphia Eagles. We saw them do it against the Dallas Cowboys. I thought going into that game against San Francisco, as I alluded to, a three-player race to the MVP. I still have to see how it plays out over the next 2 weeks. Um, but in your eyes, in your opinion, in your estimation, has Lamar Jackson now leapfrogged over McCaffrey, Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, or you want to see how the season gets closed out?
I'd like to see how it gets closed out. I think depending on what happens, if you're going to give it to a non-quarterback, then I have no problem with McCaffrey winning it. You know, he's carried those guys. He's been outstanding. If you're going to give it to a quarterback at this point, short of a meltdown or short of a huge Week 17 from one of those guys, it has to be
Right.
Lamar Jackson based off of what he did.
Yeah. I also was having the conversation, the argument earlier today on my other show, Back Your Play, where we saw co MVP back in '97
Okay.
with Brett Favre and
Yeah.
Barry Sanders. And I know, is this the year maybe where they go the non quarterback route? And if so, can you see a situation where they start to kind of wash each other out with the votes, meaning you might get a co MVP, Christian McCaffrey, Lamar Jackson? I mean, it could play in the form like that. I don't know. I just was curious your thoughts.
I'd have no problem with that. I think had Tyreek Hill not been banged up over the last few weeks and had he gotten close to that 2,000-yard mark, then at that point, you probably would have seen a wide receiver or a running back do it. But in terms of a co-MVP, McCaffrey, Lamar Jackson, I'm fine with that. But you can't give it to a signal caller and it not be Lamar Jackson, if you understand what I'm saying.
Ravens laying 3.5, 4 against Miami. We know about Miami's offense. I just look at Miami's a little bit of a different team on the road, kind of like the Dallas Cowboys are. We know they can score in points. We know Tua is going to get the ball out quickly. They come in a pretty banged up team. I just don't know if the physicality would concern me with Miami. Like if Miami goes on the road and they beat Baltimore, I still think Baltimore is a legit Super Bowl contender. You know, if
Right.
the Miami Dolphins win this 28-27 on a last second field goal, okay, so be it. I just think it's a bad matchup for Miami right now. And I don't believe in the look ahead. I don't believe in the letdown. I just think right now Baltimore is just a well oiled machine.
I agree. I think in terms of everything that the Dolphins don't do well, the Ravens do well, or they're going to bring. So in terms of Tua not performing well when he's pressured, he's going to get that all
Yeah.
afternoon. You know, you're going to get physicality, you're going to get stunts up the middle. So I'm not sure if Miami just up the middle can deal with Baltimore. I'm not sure if they can deal with Baltimore off the edge. And then in terms of, like we said, they stack up so deep in the defensive backfield. You could put Kyle Hamilton anywhere. You could put him in the slot. So you have different ways of matching up with Tyreek Hill and slowing those guys down as well.
Glenn, be kind enough to join us Thursday edition on Q. Rich Quinones here, and of course, managing editor, Eagles Wire, Ravens Wire at the TAJ cover to NFL. All right, so we know a win is a win in the NFL. I've never in my life can recall a team that's 11-4 and everyone wants to jump off the bridge. Everyone's panicking. Now, doing what we do, we have to kind of find those little cracks in the
Right.
armor, if you will. And I'll say this, I think the 49ers broke the Philadelphia Eagles, and they had that 3-game losing streak. They got woodshed. They had a bad defensive gaffe late against Seattle. They allowed the Giants to hang around. The Giants are just a bad team, man. But you got veteran guys. They want stuff on film. They're gonna play hard. I knew they had to make the switch at the half. I thought it was going to be earlier. Sit the kid DeVito down, go to Taylor. Surprised the Giants didn't throw more in that game. With all that being said, the Eagles got out of there with a win. They've got 2 very winnable games coming up against Arizona and the Giants to close out the season. I have concerns with this team right now because their defense has been exposed. Their offense is still slow out of the gate. And I believe the head coach, and I got killed on social, I've gotten killed on the show, I've gotten killed on the radio for saying this. I believe the head coach's act is wearing thin. And I look at body language, I look at how things are perceived. I look at how um, players respond. And, you know, the narrative now is, well, Sirianni showed the balls he put on his big boy pants. I don't believe that. I think it's a coach that's looking for answers. I think you've got players that are infighting, griping. I think there's a disconnect and an issue with A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts. Now, again, this is purely my speculation. And I would not be shocked if they got bounced in the first round in the playoffs. You will hear cries, as crazy as it sounds, and you know this, Glenn, covering the league as long as you have. You will hear cries for Nick Sirianni's head, meaning get him out of town, go in a new direction. Now, that's a conversation down the road, but right now, where are you at with this Eagles team? Can this be fixed? Do you trust them going into the playoffs, or you just believe it's not going to be their year? They've got too many holes on both sides of the ball.
I just think it may not be their year and they have too many holes. I think you just have a situation where it's a good team. I'm not sure we can really say they're a really good team. They struggle to be efficient on offense. I think going into week 17, even though they have the amount of wins they have, they've struggled to find their identity. And I think their identity could be a team that runs the ball 35 times a game and just game manages. But then you have the AJ Brown scenario, you have that phenomenon. So I think it's a situation where they want to be a downfield passing team while also controlling the line of scrimmage, but they're struggling to do that.
But don't so I think before the season started, a lot of us were talking about you bring in a new defensive coordinator, you bring in a new offensive coordinator. And I think a lot of people kind of glossed over that. Um, guys like you and I didn't because sometimes there's going to be an adjustment period. Defenses are typically a little more ahead of the offense. They were steamrolling teams last year. And I think what happens is when you win and you win convincingly, regardless of who you play on your schedule, you can mask a lot of stuff, right? You would agree to that. So you've got a good pass rush. I can cover up a crappy secondary. I have a really good coaching staff on both ends of the football, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. I can kind of mask my head coach's deficiencies. My issue with the head coach is a lot of the flip flopping and the wavering. And look, man, when AJ Brown was having his conversation with Hurts on the sideline against Kansas City, Sirianni walked over. Sirianni claimed, though, after the game, he didn't know what was that about. At that moment, I'm thinking to myself, man, I talked to a lot of players in the league and former players. Veteran guys see that and they're thinking to themselves, yo, man, you got to start reeling these guys in. You've had 2 straight weeks of back to back players only meetings. That tells me that something is being lost. And then all of a sudden, all right, hey, man, we're going to go a different direction with this coordinator. We're going to go a different direction with this coordinator. I mean, is it possible because of how well they played last year and they got to the Super Bowl and were a couple plays away from winning that game, we overvalued or overstated Nick Sirianni, meaning maybe he's not that good of a head coach. Maybe he's an average head coach that is still trying to figure it out, or is he a glorified cheerleader, or everything's got to be right with this guy, meaning I've got to have the perfect staff to surround him with in order for him to succeed.
No, I think he knows his football. I think he's a pretty good head coach. I think for him, and some coaches are really good in this league because of the coordinators that they have, and then you have those guys that end up having really good coaching trees and things like that. So I think it can't be overstated, how really good Shane Steichen was. And I think the
Yep.
one thing he did really good was in terms of managing his run pass ratio and knowing when to do it. I think, it's Brian Johnson's first year as an offensive play caller. Steichen kind of had some of those same frustrations in his first year, but then he figured it out. So I think for Sirianni, if you're not going to call the plays, then the one thing you should have did was make sure that you had an offensive guru or a genius there that could properly space out the running plays, the passing plays, properly manage AJ Brown. And I don't when we all understand wide receivers can be divas and things like that, but his targets are on par with last year, if not more. He has more catches than he had last year, so that means he's getting the targets he needs. So I think from that standpoint, it's just managing him, working around him and going from there. But I think Brian Johnson has to get better at his play calling, at his run pass ratio. He has to get better at mixing things up, and he has to get better at putting guys in position to make plays in space.
When I watch their offense, sometimes I feel as though, as you alluded to, there's no identity, and you've got a very good back in DeAndre Swift. I mean, give him the ball 25 plus times. And I say tongue in cheek when the crowd's saying run the football. I mean, look, media and fans, we step back and we watch these games and we're like, if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it. Like, keep pounding it, pounding it. You've got some wide receivers that are extremely talented, but they also have to understand, their number's not going to be called every single solitary time. So I'm seeing a quarterback right now that might be pressing. The pick six, I think Goddard slipped. It happens, but sliding down at the end of the half, inexplicable, that's bonehead. You don't do that. The horse collar, you don't do that. Some of the decision making what hurts. I'm wondering if he's forcing the issue a little bit because he believes he's got to get the ball to these guys because he wants to keep feeding them because they're the playmakers. He wants to keep them happy. And I'm not saying he is taking the play that's coming in and he's adjusting the play or he's calling his own play or an audible. I'm saying sometimes, man, I'm threading the needle. I'm throwing in double coverage. I mean, the Seattle game, come on. You got to know down distance, place, and the moment of the game. All you need is 15 more yards for a game tying field goal. You have no business throwing it up like that. So is it forcing the issue a little bit with Jalen Hurts? Do you think maybe he's doing that? What are you seeing on film when you watch him?
I think it's a little bit of everything. I think you have a situation where you have two all pro caliber wide receivers. I think Dallas Goedert gets it. I think Devontae Smith gets it. So they understand the targets aren't going to be there. I think AJ Brown's the guy that from week to week, even when you're feeding him and you go away from him that one time, you're going to have to kind of pay him no mind and keep going about your business. I think a lot of those throws, Hurts is trying to make splash throws when you clearly see the guy in the flat or you see the guy clear to see the guy right there. So I think he has to get back to taking what the defense gives him, and you just have to figure out how to manage AJ Brown. That's why you make all that money. That's why the coaches get paid what they do, and that's what you do when you have guys who are quote unquote alpha males at the wide receiver position or big, strong physical guys. So you're still feeding the ball, but I think that's something you manage. And at times you kind of have to ignore him, that you can't force feed him the ball. He's already had 8, 9 targets. He gets about 10 targets plus a game. So at that point, I agree with you. When you have Devontae Smith open or you have Swift right there, take what the defense gives you, live to see another day.
So everything you're saying with is on point. I agree 100%. Where I have a problem just you know, not dealing with it, but just kind of going along with it is, and you're dead on. You got an alpha male, game breaking, extremely talented wide receiver, but it starts to now become a problem, right? Because I believe the perception, the narrative, you can spin it, but it manifests itself and it starts to grow where you still have and these guys are relatively young, I understand, but the last thing I want is if you're my second or third option, you keep coming back to the huddle and you're constantly barking, man. You said the targets are right there, the numbers are right there. So it's not like they're totally going away. I mean, the Kansas City game, it wasn't really targeted. Okay, it happens sometimes, right?
You're
Sometimes you're running the ball 25, 30 plus times and you got to stick with the ground game. So do you see this becoming a problem even over the last couple of weeks and then perhaps come playoff time where you got a disgruntled wide receiver and again you're trying to force feed him the football?
No, I think for the I think for the most part the idea that the sky is falling is more of a media made narrative from Philadelphia. I think it's a situation where Jalen literally just has to ignore him. Like he's going to be an All Pro for the second year in a row. He's going to be a Pro Bowler. Depending on what happens over these next 2 games, he's going to break the Eagles single season record for yards in a season. So he's either going to match the yards he had last year or he's going to have more. So I think from that standpoint, you just have to pay A.J. Brown no mind sometimes. And I know that sounds weird. Let him go on his rant about being open and continue to feed whoever gets the ball. There are going to be games where he doesn't dominate. That's great. He's still going to be third, fourth, fifth in the NFL in receiving yards. That's not a bad year.
Right. Plus, he's getting double teamed too sometimes, right? I mean, guys are, if you get 1-on-1, he's a matchup nightmare. But sometimes you're going to get safety, you're going to get some help over the top. You don't want him to beat you. I mean, it just happens sometimes, right? I mean, you're going to have I should say, you'll have a roamer. You want to take him out of the offense, so his job might be to block or just run the routes and be that decoy for other players. And it's funny you mentioned Jalen Hurts. Man, I'll tell you, I have this conversation, I feel like every single solitary day. It almost, people want Jalen Hurts has to go 25 of 30 for 288, 2 touchdowns, 43 yards rushing, and another touchdown. I'm like, what are you doing? I would grab Jalen Hurts in a heartbeat. Like he can struggle, but then all of a sudden you see the play that he makes. He'll improvise, to third down, to third and long, horrible coverage by the Giants, but he still had to put the football where it needed to be put. I don't know, man. I think there's a fan base that is still divided, as crazy as it sounds, on Jalen Hurts. And for my money, I think he's a top 5, 6 quarterback in the NFL. That's just where I think he's a very good quarterback. I think he's a gamer. I think he's tough. I think he's a leader. I think he's frustrated like the rest of these players and the coaching staff. But I'm hearing a lot of people suggest, he's overrated, and I'm like, come on, man, what are we doing here?
No, it's a really good team. I think it's a team that on paper may not be as good as last year. I think they've played a tougher schedule. I think, some of the moves Howie Roseman made, even though he drafted Jalen Carter and got the guys from Georgia, Rashad
Yeah,
Penny hasn't played. Justin Evans is hurt. Though some of those guys didn't pan out. Terrell Edmonds got traded. So I think from that standpoint, it's a solid NFL roster. You should be happy to win 11, 12 games. They could be one and done in the playoffs. You continue to retool, you continue to rebuild. They're not going to be a juggernaut every week. They're going through growing pains. Like you said, you replace both coordinators. So you're trying to find offensive continuity and those things. So I think it's a situation where they just have to continue to play through it, try to be more efficient, but I'm not sure the switch is going to get clicked on over the next 2 weeks or just because the lights come on. I don't think they're a bored team. So it's not a situation where wait till we get to the postseason, they'll click it on. I'm
can't do
just not
that.
sure. Just not sure they'll figure it out.
No, you can't do that. Look, man, you can't do it. If you look at even all the great teams that have been picked off, you go back 2007 Patriots, they were truck rolling people, right? Then all of a sudden the Giants fought them real well. Last game of the season, 38-35. But even in the playoffs, the Pats were leaking oil. We saw it 90 with the 49ers. We saw it in 95, even though they were able to get back to the Super Bowl and win it. Dallas has had their stumbles, and then all of a sudden it falters come playoff time. I just think it's look, they're a playoff team. I mean, look, as a Giants fan, I would love to win 10, 11, friggin' 12 games a season and have the type of offense, right? The offensive line and the players that they have and be so successful with their, the Philly shove and all that kind of stuff. But that's not the reality of the NFL. I mean, there's a handful of really good teams. Then there's a substantial amount of parity. And then there's bad teams, but even this late in the season, guys still are putting stuff on tape. Arizona's not going to roll over.
Not at
They
all.
guys incentives, it's on tape. Coaches don't want to lose games. The Giants last game of the season, they're not going to roll over. They believe they let one slip away on Monday. Point being, you're at this point, man. If you haven't figured it out, it's hard for me to really believe once the playoffs start, whether it's a Detroit or a Dallas or a 49ers team, um, insert team. I mean, I think Detroit's a matchup nightmare. I think Detroit against that defense can potentially put up 35, 40 points, especially with that secondary. That's just me. I think the 49ers are built to go into Philly. I don't think the Eagles I don't think the Eagles right now are mentally tough enough to go on the road and beat the 49ers. I don't. Dallas, I think it's a different animal because you and I know with Dallas, it's always, we'll believe it when we see it. I mean, who would be their worst case scenario matchup come playoff time?
I think just in terms of where they have liabilities at, I think it's any team with a really good running back or a really good tight end, or
Yeah.
a guy that you can get in slot. So when you have a situation where the Cowboys, you have these coaches that are able to scheme their best players into position to get the ball, so that the Cowboys are going to put CeeDee Lamb in a slot. They're going to move him around. They're going to give the Eagles problems. San Francisco is going to move Debo around, George Kittle around. They're going to give the Eagles problems. So I think any team that can move Sam Laporta is a good tight end. So
Yep.
the Lions, you start to move guys around. Ben Johnson's a good offensive coordinator, knows what he sees, knows how to switch some things up. He's able to get Gibbs and the other running back both to get the carries, when to get the carries, good run pass ratio. So I think just those teams that are aware of their identities, aware of what they want to do offensively, those three teams are going to give us the most problems.
I mean, 49ers for your money right now is still the team to beat coming out of the NFC.
Of course, I mean, as long as Trent Williams, will all they always have that excuse. Okay,
He
well,
should be the MVP, by the way.
right. Whenever he's not in the game, everything goes to hell. So that should be the conversation. But as long as he's as left tackle and they go into the playoffs and they have all those pieces there, I think they'll be the favorite, followed by Dallas, Detroit, Philadelphia, things like that. But until you can establish what you want to do offensively, do it confidently, and get guys in the space, you're going to struggle.
uh, Two more before I let you get out of here, and always appreciate a couple moments. I tweeted this out the other day. I can't recall a season where there's been so much shuffling at the quarterback position, and you've got backups, undrafted guys, practice squad guys being elevated, guys coming off the sofa. What does that say about the quarterbacking position right now in the NFL?
I mean, you see, it's still the most important position, and I mean, I think that's the one position that makes the game go. So when you don't have it, I don't care who you go outside of the Flacco situation and other things like that. You're not gonna okay. You can hit lightning in the bottle for a few weeks with Josh Dobbs, but if you don't have a really good signal caller, you have no shot.
Yeah.
And I think
And,
that's why they make the most money.
yeah, and listen, some of these guys are having a bounce back, great comeback stories. I mean, Baker Mayfield, that's fun to watch in Tampa. He's just a
Yeah.
gamer. I mean, the kid's a gamer. Dobbs had a couple moments, Flacco off the sofa. Um, I
I'd
said
also
last,
chalk I'd also
uh,
chalk it up too when we talk about offensive coordinators. A lot of these,
oh yeah,
quarterbacks and things that are doing, they got guys that know how to scheme things up, and at least for a week or two, call good plays, get guys open, things like that.
which is a great segue into this. I thought last year, I said Russell Wilson was cooked. I thought he was done. Um, I never liked the Peyton hire. I think Sean Payton is still too old school. He wants that pocket. He wants the Drew Brees. And the game is not, when he was with the Giants, he turned it around with Kerry Collins. And then after they got to the Super Bowl in 2000, offense and nothing against that great Ravens team. Fossil pulled the play calling a year or two after. He wanted to take over the offense. I never liked the fit. We saw last year Hackett was just overwhelmed. Okay, go to the Jets, have fun with Rodgers. We know how that's turned out thus far. I think when you're 35, 36, you've been as sacked as many times as Russell Wilson has, and he hasn't played that poorly this season. You've got a head coach that wants an offense a certain type of way. It wasn't going to fit, but I feel as though Denver, and again, I'm not the biggest Russell Wilson fan, um, but I think they kind of did him dirty here, man. To be honest, you know, you gave up so much for him, and you're still mathematically alive for the playoffs. I understand it's about the contract and the clause and getting hurt and all this, but I feel as though he was they were always figuring, hey, let's just get through this season because we know he's not the answer, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. I think anything short of him winning an MVP or those guys making a long playoff run, he was going to get the blame anyway. I mean, you have a new coach, you have a new ownership group. The only way to literally blow it up and start over is to eat that dead cap with him and then come back in 2025 and start over. So I think from that standpoint, you were always going to see this happen. Short of him, being an MVP candidate or throwing for 40 touchdowns or something like that. But outside of that, they're going to live and die with Sean Payton, and then we'll see. But I think he has 6 or 7 or good 8 options, for teams that are looking for a stopgap or a team that's that close and just needs a solid veteran quarterback.
Yeah, I think stopgap bridge quarterback. But again, in his age, are you trying to tailor the offense around him, or are you asking him to change his game a little bit?
I think he's good enough and intelligent enough to be efficient. He's been efficient this year. So I think from the standpoint, you're definitely going to have to protect him in the pocket. He's not that tall. So some of the flaws or some of the things that could have been downfalls for him early in his career, you're starting to see. So I think he has to go to a team that has good offensive tackle help, who has a good offensive play caller, and who can essentially let him just be him, not necessarily cook, but make the timely throws, play action throws, and things of that nature.
Not let him cook, maybe marinate a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Do a little bit here and there, but not in terms of going out and having free reign. No, but to scheme him up and put him in a position with some good weapons around him. Similar to what Baker Mayfield did this year.
Yeah. Uh, let's see, 124 million in salary, 35.4 2024 dead cap money, 49.6 2025 dead cap money. Couple players, including Drew Lock, and then you got the first round pick, second round pick, fifth round pick, first round pick, second round pick. Obviously, those draft picks have come and gone with some of these players. So he's played in Denver for 2 seasons. He's gone 11-19. When I heard Sean Payne's comments during the offseason, I'm like, oh man, it's just a matter of time, man. It's just a matter of time before they figure out a way where it's not working. Last one for you. You never like to see guys get fired. I believe we're going to see a substantial amount of head coaching turmoil. I'm going to throw out a couple names, regardless of what ownership, if they gave in the voter confidence or not, because that can change in a heartbeat. So let me give you a couple names. Let's go with I pull it up right here. All right. Even though Woody Johnson said they're going to be back, Robert Saleh, Joe Douglas. If Belichick's available, you still believe that Saleh and Joe Douglas are coming back?
Yeah, I think Woody will do whatever Aaron Rodgers wants him to do. So if Aaron Rodgers had a targeted coach or something like that, they'd make a move. But if Rodgers gave the seal, the vote of confidence, then they'll be back.
Eberflus in Chicago.
There's improved down the stretch. I mean, I think if you have a home run higher, or you've heard the horrible name, something like that, maybe you make it. But if not, I don't see the reason to restart.
Smith in Atlanta.
I think he needs a quarterback more than you need a new head coach. But I think if Blank can get a guy that he sees, then maybe yes. But in terms of just overall a far better candidate out there, no.
If the Cowboys get bounced in the first round, does McCarthy still come back?
Yes, I think he's your best option outside of a big name head coach or a Mike Tomlin or someone wanting a fresh start or something like that.
I think Tomlin comes back, even though it seems I think Pittsburgh would be foolish. Mike Tomlin would get hired in a second. Like, why are you getting rid of, that team's got their own issues. I listen, that wide receiver might have had a big game, but he needs an attitude adjustment. I'm not sold on the quarterback. I think you got to build that offensive line. But if Mike Tomlin were to get fired, Pittsburgh, they don't fire coaches in season. We know that, and we know about their track record with 3 over the last 50 something odd years. Rivera in Washington.
I think he's done.
Does that also mean that you believe Eric Bieniemy will be done in Washington too?
Yeah, I can't. I Yes, I can't see why ownership, even with Rivera, even with the way the offense performed, it wasn't a situation where it was a poor defense. Washington's offense was outstanding. You just need some players on the defensive side of the ball. Sam Howell got worse as the season went on. Everything got worse as the season went on.
And the irony too, when he was playing well, we were giving credit to Bieniemy, right?
Right.
And it's one of the reasons I was like, all right, it's a good fit. Get out of Andy Reid's shadow. If you're Eric Bieniemy, who do you have for Coach of the Year? Lastly,
Thank McDaniel.
really, what about Stefanski?
Yeah, I feel ignorant. Yeah, I'll go with Kevin. I was thinking him or Dan Campbell. I'll go with Stefanski. You got me.
Yeah, I no. Listen, your opinion is your opinion. I think
No, I think the
McDaniel's a
full
great.
quarter. Yeah, I think no. I think once you was really assess it, take a look at the fact that your best running back's gone. You've got some guys on defense out. Your left tackle's out. I think your right tackle's out
Yeah,
too. And then you've had to play with 4 different quarterbacks, and you still may win, 11 or 12 games.
yeah, and listen, I thought the Lions too. The expectations. I actually had the Lions in Cincinnati as my Super Bowl participants. I just think the expectations were there. You knew Rodgers was going to be out of that division. I didn't think Cousins was going to get hurt. Green Bay's still a young team. So, but all right, what do you got going on Eagles Wire and Ravens Wire? I'm sure you got a lot of content up there. If you want to plug anything before I let you get out of here, as always.
I appreciate it. With the
No
Eagles,
problem.
the sky is falling, even though they're about to win the NFC East. So at that point, we're just trying to placate fans, make them feel better. In terms of the Ravens, they're a monster. They're a juggernaut. So at this point, that their fans are hyped. So I envisioned an Eagles Ravens Super Bowl. The content creation of all, but I don't think that'll happen. But I think Baltimore is stout. Philadelphia's trying to figure things out. Both are good for the business.
All right, we got a couple weeks before we hit the playoffs. We're going to do it again. Don't forget, give Glenn a follow at the THA cover to NFL managing editor at the Eagles Wire and the Ravens Wire. Even though we're a couple days past Christmas, how long will you keep the decorations and the ornaments up? Do we slip into the new year? Are you a February kind of guy, or
I'm like a January 4th type kind of guy. So, yeah. So I know that the wife likes to keep them up, so they'll stay up past the first or the second, and we'll take them down from there. But you got to go past the new year.
that's and you know what? I can live with that. I used to have neighbors. You drive by in friggin' late January, early February, you would still see a lit tree.
Yeah, same house lit up and things like that. You'll see some houses still lit up in some March. So I think it just depends on how you're feeling.
Yeah, no doubt about that. All right, brother. Appreciate you jumping on for a couple moments.
Appreciate you always, Rich. You know how we do.
Yeah, absolutely, bro. Be well.
Thank you.